Hello, I'm Nurse Dad, former Navy hospital corpsman and current ER nurse, and welcome to my channel. This Nurse Dad video is going to be divided into 4 parts, part 1 being Alan Ritchson. Now, he is the man behind Jack Reacher. He is an actor, but that's not why I'm talking about him today. He recently appeared for the second time on Michael Rosenbaum's Inside of You podcast. This is one of the podcasts I listen to whenever I can. Joe Rogan's is one of them, Bill Maher, Theo Vaughn's. I appreciate people who are unbiased. At least they strive to be unbiased. They're thoughtful. They're not afraid to be wrong. They don't go into their interviews with an agenda, with an ideology, that they're just looking to have their beliefs confirmed for them. Now, I'm kind of busy between being a business owner, a nurse, a father, so I don't get to listen to these podcasts in their entirety, not really. Typically just clips on YouTube. If I do get to listen in full, I'm either driving and not listening to my audiobook, or I'm working out in my garage. In this case, I was driving from South Carolina with my family, visiting my in-laws, back to New York. It's a 12, 13-hour drive. I was able to listen to the interview in full. I'm not gonna lie, the interview blew me away, which leads me into part 2 of this video, bipolar. I wanted to play clips, but I'm not really sure what the YouTube rules are. I don't want to get flagged or anything like that, so I'm just going to really talk about it. I encourage you to watch the podcast. There's 2 of them. Basically, Alan Ritchson, he's a married father of 3. He's got 3 boys, and it wasn't until about 35 or 36 years old that he was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. As a nurse, I've treated my fair share of patients who were bipolar, but I've never heard it described the way Alan Ritchson described it, and I really appreciate the level of detail. He actually called it unipolar. He used an example like you're driving in your car, you're having a pretty good day, somebody cuts you off, and for, a moment you get really angry. And then after some time you switch back into what you were doing, you continue to drive. Somebody with bipolar, they get angry and it's just like sort of a rabbit hole. They can't get out of it. The same mechanisms that people use to, okay, I'm happy, I'm not happy, but now I'm happy again. You just don't have it. Of course, I'm paraphrasing here, but it's essentially how he described it. So instead of bipolar, he called it unipolar. And I thought that this was a great description. On the flip side, somebody with mania, the manic side of bipolar, they're very elevated. A lot of people in that stage, in the beginning of that stage, won't take their medication anymore because they think, oh, I don't need it, I'm feeling great. And that high only continues to get more high, to the fact that they don't want to sit down. They want to move around. They might be up all night, walking outside, running around the track 30 times, feeling fantastic. Also not eating, not drinking, not taking care of themselves, not realizing that maybe I don't even have any shoes on. Really entrenched in that emotion and that emotional high. Again, unipolar. It's so challenging to describe bipolar disorder without, the stigma or people just not understanding what you're talking about. But that unipolar description, where you're driving in your car, somebody cuts you off, you feel mad. Eventually, when you don't have bipolar, you kind of get out of it, right? You go home, you eat dinner, you watch TV, you're fine. But someone who's bipolar, they got mad and they just stay there. And it just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. Amazing description. Not only did Alan Ritchson, who's playing the most alpha of alpha men on TV, divulge that he had bipolar disorder, he also talked about his experience, which leads us into part 3 of this video, suicide. Alan Ritchson didn't just have suicidal ideation at one point in his life. He literally hung himself. Married father of 3, went to the 2nd story of his house and hung himself. And he attributed the fact that he works out to how he was able to free himself. Now, how could a father of 3 kill himself? Well, in Alan Ritchson's words, he thought he was doing the world a favor. He calls it the biggest lie you could tell yourself, and it's true. This man who has a wife and 3 sons thought that he was doing the world a favor by killing himself. And this was after a great year professionally, he said. Alan Ritchson's story touched me because I know of a service member who had a few kids and a wife and hung himself in the barracks. This was a combat veteran, a friend of mine, someone I served with. I actually had sent him home on deployment to receive help, and what he did was he drank a bottle of whiskey and he hung himself. At the time, I was a Navy hospital corpsman, and even now, looking back as a nurse, as understanding as I can be, I would lie if I never asked myself, how does a father of children kill themselves? Well, watch the podcast with Alan Ritchson, Inside of You. There's 2 of them. If you want to find out the answer to that, he goes into great detail, and I'm going to leave it at that. Part 4, honesty. What I really appreciate about Alan Ritchson's podcast is that he's opening up about something that really exists. Everyone suffers from something, and there's not a lot of room to talk about what's ailing you. To reiterate, on deployment, I sent my buddy back home who was suffering from PTSD from a previous deployment. And when he got home, There just weren't a lot of resources for him. Men especially. Men who just want to talk about what's ailing them, why they feel like they're suffering, why they feel like they're drowning. There's a perception of men that you have to be a certain way. You have to always be strong, never complain, never weep. And I'm not saying I necessarily disagree with a lot of these concepts. I don't believe that men should be overly emotional. I just don't. Some men are, that's fine, but there should be room to talk about what's bothering you always, without the stigma, without the judgment. So at one point in my Navy career as a Navy hospital corpsman, I was stationed in Naples, Italy. Well, it was a clinic in Naples, Italy. I saw in the waiting room something that is not supposed to happen in Navy medicine. A captain in the Navy, high-ranking officer, was pacing back and forth. Now, normally you'd be told in advance that this person was coming, and as soon as they do come in, you'd usher him into the exam room. But he was pacing back and forth and didn't look very happy about it. And my initial reaction was, oh my God, this officer was unannounced and he's actually waiting. But as I approached him, I saw that something just wasn't right. I can't explain it to you in this video. Let's just call it medical instinct. So I did what I was supposed to do. I put him in the exam room with the door open so I could see him at all times while I called the second in command. She was a nurse. To make the long story short, this very successful naval officer was considering suicide. My lieutenant had him transferred to the Naval Hospital, but unfortunately they didn't have the resources for mental health. I'm not sure how it went down, but he was eventually sent home. His wife was with their son in Germany, some kind of spelling bee, and his daughter was home. I think she was a teenager. Anyway, when he got home, he threw himself off his balcony with a rope around his neck. And tragically, his daughter saw it. This man was a very strong man. This man was a faithful man. This man was a great father. He was an outstanding naval officer. He wasn't selfish. He wasn't a coward. He was inflicted with something. And it makes sense. What Alan Ritchson said makes sense. He must have been absolutely convinced that he was doing the world a favor. If you found merit in this video, please like, share, and subscribe. I'm Nurse Dad, and my goal here is to make videos that talk about the human experience pivoting toward medical. Until next time, Nurse Dad out. Hey, it's Nurse Dad again. Please excuse my screaming girls if you can hear them. I'm in my gym, well, my garage. I just wanted to say, because I forgot to say this before, in my view, solitude is fundamental to mental health. Solitude isn't loneliness, it's just being able to be alone in your thoughts, a time for reflection and self-examination. And in my view, nobody talked about solitude better than the great German poet Rene Marie Rilke. I've read it several times, it's a Bible of mine. I encourage you to read Stephen Mitchell's translation of Rene Marie Rilke's Letters to a Young Poet. Real quick, there was a time where an amateur poet contacted Mr. Rilke and they exchanged letters. These are 10 letters from Mr. Rilke to the young poet. And in these letters, he talks about solitude, loneliness, fear, joy, creativity. It's only like 90 pages. Every couple of years, I reread it to pick up this book. You're going to be a better person after you read it, I promise you. Thanks a lot. And if you need me, I'll be in the gym.